The Detroit Lions spent a lot of money this offseason, signing Amon-Ra St. Brown, Penei Sewell, and Jared Goff all to record-breaking contracts. But despite that, despite signing these three players to well over $500 million combined, despite being big spenders in free agency, and despite having big contracts on the books, the Detroit Lions are going into 2024 with $40.3 million in cap space. For the second offseason in a row, Brad Holmes is going into the season with more cap space than he had going into the offseason. After signing free agents, after signing the draft class, after signing all of these big players to big money deals, Brad Holmes currently has $40.3 million left to spend. And unlike the two teams with more cap space, that being the Washington Commanders and the New England Patriots, the Detroit Lions do not have any holes on their roster. They have filled the cornerback position. They have strengthened a defensive tackle. They've added depth on the offensive line, as well as a number of players that could develop into starters a couple of years down the road, as well as even addressing the edge rushing and the pass rushing situation throughout the offseason. Now, with that being said, that doesn't mean that there are no players available that could make the Detroit Lions a better football team. Some of those players include Yannick Ngakoue, the perennial 8 to 10 sack player of the Jaguars and the Raiders and the Colts, and most recently of the Chicago Bears, where last year he spent a majority of his season having about 5.5 sacks on that defensive line and being a solid pass rusher for about and being a really solid pass rusher for the last 6 to 8 years in the NFL, he could certainly come in, be a pass rushing specialist, and be a player that helps the Detroit Lions convert their massive amount of pressures to a few sacks to end a few drives. Free agent and all-pro safety Justin Simmons is still available in free agency. The former Denver Bronco is yet to sign with a team, and at this point in free agency, very well could just be looking for any place to call home and potentially be looking at a discount. Carl Lawson, the longtime Cincinnati Bengal and recent New York Jet, has been really good. 27 sacks over his first 5 career seasons, a young pass rusher with a good run stop ability, good pass rush ability, and somebody that probably won't break the bank, but could add 5, 6, 7 sacks to your defense. And again, much like Yannick Ngakoue, could be a role player, a rotational guy, and help convert some of those pressures to sacks and ended drives. Fan favorite Quandre Diggs, the former slot cornerback and strong safety for the Detroit Lions, a great starter in Seattle the last 3 to 4 years, is a free agent. And again, with the saturation at the safety position, you could see a lot of these safeties signing for lesser deals and signing for lesser money to go and play football and continue their career. Similar thing goes for Tracy Walker, a player that a lot of fans really love, a player that knows the system, a former team captain, and somebody that won't cost a lot of money for the Detroit Lions, could add some more safety depth and could allow the defense to be even more versatile than it is already set up to be. Jamal Agnew, one of my favorite players as a Detroit Lion and one of the fan favorites when he was a Detroit Lion, a former first-team All-Pro kick and punt returner as a rookie, wide receiver depth, kick return depth, punt returner depth, just a good football player who is explosive, who can contribute on special teams, contribute on the offense, and a player that, again, will not be very pricey. And then another safety, Eddie Jackson, a player that over the last couple of years has been a really, really good safety when healthy. And going back even a couple of years ago to the 2018-2019 season, Eddie Jackson was a legit competitor for Defensive Player of the Year, but now being cut by the Bears, being an expensive product. He is a guy that probably won't start for the Detroit Lions, but could be that third safety, could be that rotational guy. And for a cheaper contract, again, due to the oversaturated market, you could see a lot of safeties signing with cheaper deals and deals that feel like really good bargains, because at the end of the day, there are 5 or 6 legit starting caliber safeties out there and not enough teams that need starting caliber safeties and are ready to shell out the money. Taking a look at the Detroit Lions pass rushing situation, it's not a bad group, but it could certainly use some more veteran pass rushers and somebody with a little bit more consistency than what they have shown in the past. Aiden Hutchinson is a phenomenal player, former second overall pick, great run stopper, great pass rusher, probably a dark horse defensive player of the year candidate for the Detroit Lions, who needs a pass rushing partner. Marcus Davenport, the former first-round pick by the New Orleans Saints, has been a good pass rusher, has put up good numbers in the NFL, but does have an issue staying healthy beyond that 11-game point. He's only played more than 11 games once in his NFL career, but he's also only played less than 11 games once in his NFL career. He is a guy that lasts about 2.5, 3 months in the NFL season, and then for some reason just seems to not be able to finish, whether it be a nagging injury or a major injury. He's a guy that will contribute, but probably won't last the entire season and might not be healthy down the stretch of the NFL year. Josh Pascal and John Kaminsky are good run stoppers, are good interior guys with versatility across the line, but they're going to be guys that at their peak give you 6 sacks a season and aren't necessarily going to be the best pass rushers. James Houston is a phenomenal pass rushing specialist, but he's not really the greatest run stopper. He's not the greatest all-around football player. And then you have Matthew Betts from the CFL, who's 29 years old, and yeah, he's coming off of 2 great seasons in the CFL, where he had 7 sacks in 2022 and 18 sacks in 2023, but we don't know how that game is going to translate to the NFL. We don't know how that is going to translate from CFL football to NFL football, and I don't think it's wise to rely on Betts to be your pass rushing specialist alongside Aiden Hutchinson if Marcus Davenport does go down with an injury, which is why I think it does make a lot of sense for the Detroit Lions to potentially go out and get a Yannick Ngakoue, to go out and get a Carl Lawson, somebody that you know is going to get you 5.5, 6, 7, 8 sacks in his NFL season. And potentially, if Marcus Davenport doesn't make it the entirety of the season, then you have a true quality backup pass rusher that you can trust to get you edge rusher 2 numbers. Now, in the wide receiving game, I will admit the wide receiving core is a little bit shallow in the absence of Josh Reynolds. Amon-Ra St. Brown is great, an all-pro caliber wide receiver who will continue to be great. Jameson Williams, I think, can step up and be a great wide receiver too. Donovan Peoples-Jones, I think, can be a good wide receiver 2/3, a solid X wide receiver for any team in the NFL. Khalif Raymond, a super underrated slot wide receiver who's going to put up 400 to 500 yards. And Antoine Green, a former 7th-round pick that I think has a lot of potential. I think has some good big play speed, is kind of that prototypical X size of 6'2", 210 pounds, 4.4 speed, is a really, really good option. But I think if you wanted to add a little bit more depth, you could bring in a guy like Jamal Agnew, who could be a great kick return depth, a great punt return depth guy, a great wide receiver depth guy, a role player on the Jaguars over the last couple of seasons as a slot wide receiver, as a kick returner, as a punt returner. Again, a former first-team all-pro kick and punt returner for the Lions could be a good option for the Detroit Lions to add for just that little bit more depth. And I don't think it's going to cost them a whole lot of money, probably $3 to $4 million a season, if that, for a player that would likely be the wide receiver 5 and kick and punt returner 2, but still add some really, really quality depth. And then, of course, you have the safety position with Kirby Joseph, Ifeatu Melifonwu, Brian Branch, CJ Moore, and Brandon Joseph. And while it's not a bad room, if you do want Brian Branch to play more of a slot cornerback role and solely a slot cornerback role like we saw last season, then it goes from a really deep safety room to kind of just an okay safety room with 2 really good starters, but then CJ Moore and Brandon Joseph as your backups. Whereas in free agency, you have Quandre Diggs, you have Justin Simmons, you have Tracy Walker, you have Eddie Jackson, who is an option for you at the safety position. So potentially going out and getting a safety at that position as well. But at the end of the day, I do think that the Detroit Lions are likely just going to hold on to that money. I think they're going to let it roll over into 2025. They're going to sign the rest of their rookies. They're going to go through the season with probably 30, $40 million of cap space available to them. And I think they're going to roll it over to 2025, where Aleem McNeil has a big contract coming up. Ifeatu Melifonwu has a big contract coming up. Derek Barnes is up for a contract. Carlton Davis is up for a contract. And several other key players on this team are up for contract extensions. Taylor Decker being another one. The Lions are going to need that money. So while I think it would be fun and I think it would be nice to have a little bit more wide receiver depth, well, I'd love to see Jamal Agnew back in Detroit. I'd love to see Quandre Diggs back in Detroit. I'd love to see Yannick Ngakoue signed for $3 to $4 million to be a rotational pass rusher. I would also much rather have a Lee McNeil long-term. I would also much rather have Ifeatu Melifonwu as a long-term player, or Taylor Decker for 3 to 4 more years, and Derek Barnes to return as a starting linebacker. So while it is fun to think about, it is interesting to say, what can the Lions do with that money? I do think the wiser decision would be to let that cap space roll over, lock up your assets long-term, and continue to build through the draft and continue to build a Super Bowl competitor. With all of that being said, that is just my opinion. Let me know down in the comments below if you want to see the Detroit Lions spend any of that cap space money, whether it be on one of the free agents we talked about today or a free agent we haven't talked about today, somebody else that's on the open market, a Jamal Adams, an Xavier Howard, a Stephon Gilmore, an offensive player, a defensive player, whatever the case may be. Let me know down in the comments below how you want to see the Detroit Lions utilize that cap space. I'd be very curious to hear what you guys have to say. But with all of that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so very much for watching. Until next time, and as always, go Lions.